Investigative reporter Martin Stedman has been doing a preliminary survey of cities in our metropolitan which might experience racial difficulties over the summer. After some behind-the-scenes investigating, he sent this confidential memo to WCBS TV News executives. It reads in part, "Perhaps a more meaningful story is developing right now in Newark. I'm afraid this is the city in this area that is going to explode in the next few weeks or months." Our reporters, working as unobtrusively as possible, continue to take a hard look at the troubled city, its politics, economy, social makeup, its educational system, and its law enforcement. Naturally, with that information in hand, we kept a very close watch on developments there. When a controversy broke out between the black community and City Hall over the appointment of the Secretary to the Board of Education, WCBS TV News had the only newsreel camera present. The meeting where the issue was to be decided was almost a free-for-all. Secretary of the Board is a powerful position in Newark's overcrowded and decaying school system. Mayor Artenisio had his man and the votes to elect him, but the black community had its man and was determined to block Artenisio.
There's one thing that I want to let the police know and let the Board of Education know right now.
The Negroes made a shambles of the meeting and a compromise was effected, extending the term of the retiring secretary. If city officials had not gotten it before, the message was there. The Newark Negroes were not to be denied. Reporter Stedman continued his investigation, sending memo after confidential memo to WCBS TV News executives, keeping them appraised of the situation in Newark. Still, in the public interest, we held back. And then, on the night of July the 12th, 1 month after Stedman's first memo, the rioting began. It followed the arrest of a Negro taxi driver. A rumor that he had been beaten and even killed got started in the black community, and small gangs of Negroes roamed the streets, breaking into shops and liquor stores. 14 were arrested. We were now free to release the story we had been preparing, but sitting on for weeks. That night, on our evening report, WCBS TV News broadcast a 14-minute special report, not just a surface look, but an in-depth profile based on hard facts and figures depicting a city in deep trouble.
This is where the slums are, and the slums belong almost exclusively to the Negroes. A soft, rotten core and an apple that boasts a shiny skin of suburbs. The last census, taken in 1960, lists almost 135,000 dwelling units in Newark. Of those, more than 22,000 were rated below standard. That means 16% of all dwelling units were not fit to live in, the highest percentage of substandard housing in the nation. And the last 7 years has brought no measurable improvement. There are 100 census tracts in this city, and not one is without its Negroes. Among the two largest tracts are the Central and Third Wards, the core of the core, and they are almost totally black. These residential areas consist of depressing rows of wooden tenements, some of which were standing over a century ago. They look as though they should be abandoned, except that the piles of garbage in the streets, alleys, and in the basements are too fresh for that.
This is one of the many public schools in Newark rapidly losing ground because of overcrowded conditions. The students that go to the school are on double session. One group comes in the morning, every seat is taken, they leave, another group comes in the afternoon. They're all part of 2,400 students who are on split session and do not get a full-day education. According to the Newark Committee for Better Public Schools, the problem is simply that there aren't enough schools and classrooms. There are 10,000 Newark students who do not have school seats as of today. 39 out of 50 schools have severe overcrowded conditions. In the meantime, the school population is growing. Nothing has been done about it since 1965. Not one building, not one spade has been placed in the ground since they received their new budget. Meanwhile, the percentage of Negro children in public schools grows larger every year, reflecting the rapidly shifting population in Newark.
Foremost political question in Newark today is, will this city have a Negro mayor in 1970? The basis for the question is in the classic mold of many other American cities. The white exodus to the suburbs, leaving the Negro in possession of the central core. Newark Negroes are dissatisfied with the substandard housing in this core and with the frequently degrading jobs that many hold. Protest does contribute to their political impetus. But a larger factor is that by the simple arithmetic of population increases and swelling registration figures, Newark Negroes now feel they have the votes.
There's plenty of vacant land around Newark on which to build new factories. Even more may be made available here in the meadowlands near the city. The plan is to make this saltwater slum stable enough to hold buildings and then give anyone willing to set up shop here a special tax break. There are already other advantages to doing business in Newark. Shipping, for instance, is convenient and cheap, both by rail and by water. But the city only recently organized an industrial development agency, something most other large communities have had for years, and it clearly has not attracted its share of new industry. These large tracts of rubble-strewn land near the center of the city suggest one reason why companies go elsewhere instead of setting up factories here. Along with the airport, this urban renewal land is part of a shocking 60% of Newark's 15,000 acres that is not on the tax rolls. This land has stood idle for years. Of 16 urban renewal projects announced in the past decade, not one has been completed. The developers have all backed down. And the fact that all of this is off the tax rolls places a disproportionately large tax burden on firms that are willing to do business in the city.
That night also, WCBS TV News had obtained, by working with the New York City Police Department, gotten the figures on violent crimes per 100,000 population in Newark for the first 3 months of the year. The story they told was startling when compared to New York's record for the same period. Murder, 3.9 in Newark, 2.1 in New York. Rape, 8.9 in Newark, 5.6 in New York. Robbery, 100.4 per 100,000 in Newark, 102.7 in New York. Aggravated assault, 111.1 in Newark, 78.8 in New York. Now also was the time for reporter Stedman to speak publicly about Newark. The story he told on our evening report was not just of a local upheaval.
Newark has its own civil rights leaders, but recently it's been attracting rights activists from all over the country, and many of them veterans of the great integration battles in the South. One of the most militant of these activists is Thomas Emmett Hayden. He's from Michigan. 3 years ago, he went to North Vietnam with Yale professor Stoughton Lind against the wishes of the United States government. When they returned, the two men wrote a book which was sympathetic to the North Vietnamese. He holds no job in the Newark poverty program, but he can be reached there. I've reached him there myself. Another out-of-towner is Colonel Jeru Ahmed Hassan of Washington, who heads the Black Star Regiment. He claims to have 3,000 uniformed troops at his command, but he's been able to recruit only about 10 in Newark. He appears at civic meetings, and last month at the hearing over a decision to condemn 50 acres of land in the Negro community to make way for a new medical school, Hassan was ejected by the Newark police. His real name is Albert Roy Osborne, and he has a long record of arrests and convictions, mostly for forgery and bad checks. The literature he distributes stamps him as an anti-Semite. Another is Captain Rafiq, Hassan's second-in-command. His real name is Darrell Dawson, and he too was ejected from that medical school hearing for disorderly conduct. The one thing that struck me so far, Jim, over in Newark is that many of these civil rights activists are connected in some way or another with the poverty program. Only last month, 16 VISTA volunteers arrived in Newark from out of state to assist the poverty program over there, and I saw some of them at the school board hearing, which was so disorderly, which was forced to adjourn by the mob.
It should be mentioned here that it was days after the actual riot that other news media began reporting the influence of anti-poverty workers on the upheaval. July 19th for the New York Times, August 5th for the Newark Evening News, which ran under this headline, the same story WCBS TV News had aired almost 3 weeks earlier. The second night of violence began when a crowd gathered at the precinct house where the arrested cabbie had been taken the night before. At first it was an orderly protest, but then a bottle flew and the riot resumed. That night and early the next morning, our cameras recorded some of the most dramatic footage of the upheaval. On Friday, we were the only station to preempt a regularly scheduled program for a report on the Newark situation.
2 at 1 will not be seen today in order to bring you the following special report from WCBS TV News on the rioting in Newark.
Looting and shooting by both police and rooftop snipers, and 3 Negroes were killed, one of them a 16-year-old boy, Russell Walden. Police said he was shot to death. The 2 others died of gunshot wounds and a fractured skull. A dozen other persons were wounded by gunfire, and an estimated 340 others were injured. Newark's 1,400-man police force, reinforced by 300 state troopers, wielded shotguns in an effort to calm the wild mobs, but to no avail. There were more than 80 fires reported, many of them involving automobiles, including a police department squad car. One mob even set fire to a Good Humor man's truck. Newark's fire department was unable to handle all the calls and asked for help from neighboring communities. Among the injured were 27 firemen and policemen. Firemen reported that they were showered with bricks, rocks, and bottles as they tried to put out the fires. Damage from looting and vandalism is expected to run into millions of dollars. In some cases, police caught looters in the act and escorted them to the police station. An estimated 500 arrests were made during the night. One fire broke out in a building housing a furniture store, another in a toy store set off by a Molotov cocktail. There were scores of alarms turned in, and a fire truck answering one of them collided with a private car. 3 persons in the car were injured. Firemen pitched in to help them. An ambulance came to take the injured to the hospital, despite the fact that ambulances were a favorite target of the rioters. Few ambulances escaped attack by rock throwers.
Also on that special broadcast were interviews with Newark leaders concerned over the turmoil in their city, and our efforts did not go unnoticed by the press. From the Daily News, the next day, Channel 2 can take a bow for delivering a half-hour report yesterday afternoon on Thursday's rioting in Newark. In addition to excellent films of the outburst, the 1 p.m. telecast, which preempted 2 at 1, showed Governor Hughes' press conference, plus interviews with Negro leaders, Mayor Ardenizio, and eyewitnesses. On Friday, the National Guard was mobilized, and so was a WCBS TV News remote unit. Again, we were faced with the problem of reporting the news without adding fuel to the already explosive situation. We had to work without lights, and live cameras in the riot area would attract too much attention. The site finally picked for the remote was the secured National Guard Armory, the communications center for the city's defense, well out of the actual riot area. The decision paid off immediately.
Naturally, we told the governor, exactly 6:03.
Live and exclusive, Governor Hughes and Mayor Ardenizio on the evening report.
Do you consider this to be a Negro rebellion?
I do not. No, this is a criminal rebellion. It's an anarchy against the government and society in which we live, and we're going to make sure that society wins.
Mayor, the governor said there are no civil rights problems here. Do you concur in that, or do the Negroes have some legitimate complaints?
Well, I don't think that Newark is any different than any other large city in America. We have many problems in housing and education, and we have always tried to move very strongly in these areas to correct these situations. This is not to say that everything is perfect in Newark, but I think in the past 5 years under my administration, we have made tremendous progress.
Again, our extra effort was recognized by the press. From the trade newspaper Variety, Friday's 6 p.m. news on WCBS TV had an excellent riot wrap-up lasting through the first half hour of the show, well ahead with the up-to-the-minute report. At the same time, WCBS TV News was solving a communication problem of its own by setting up a small-scale newsroom in a suite high up in Newark's Robert Treat Hotel. This gave us a 24-hour center of operation, enabling us to monitor police radios and to be in constant contact with our own radio crew cars and the main desk back in New York. A helicopter pad just behind the hotel enabled us to shuttle film from the riot area to the New York newsroom in a matter of minutes. That home away from home proved invaluable as the riots evolved from the more or less concentrated looting and mob action stage to the widespread sniper stage. WCBS TV News had up to 11 camera crews working the Newark story, giving us 24-hour coverage. The ability to maintain good control and communications under the most difficult circumstances was a must.
be happy for it. Use your shotguns and revolvers.
Up the wall. He comes up over that wall. Blow it right off. You stick your head up that wall. Go ahead.
We had an overall total of 13 reporters and correspondents working the Newark story in various shifts and under various circumstances, like the night correspondent Jean Parr and her crew, pinned inside the hospital by sniper fire just outside the door, recorded the end results of the ferocious fighting.
Every few minutes, victims of the riot are brought in on a stretcher or in a wheelchair. Perhaps the most tragic case was when they tried to rush 10-year-old Edmund Moss, shot in the head, to the operating room. But it was too late, and the little boy, an innocent victim of a stray bullet, was dead. By 11 p.m., over 50 people suffering from gunshot wounds had been admitted to City Hospital. 30 on the critical list, 12 dead on arrival or shortly thereafter, all at one hospital. Every surgeon affiliated with the hospital is on duty. All the operating rooms, all 8, are busy. And in the intensive care unit, Dr. Irving Rowlands, director of surgery, took his first break in hours to talk about an evening that he said he hadn't seen the likes of in his entire medical profession. Doctor, how many people have come in this hospital since this riot started?
Well, we've actually lost count. As of 9 o'clock this morning, we had done over 21 operations, and since then I have no idea what we've done.
How many doctors? Do you have a full staff here operating all the time?
Yes, I have my full staff of both house staff and visiting men. Everybody has been most cooperative and highly responsive, and we've just been a wonderful team. And
How many hours?
Well, we've all been working basically, I guess, since about 11:30 last night without stop.
No sleep?
Haven't had any yet.
And still the sirens whine and the victims come in. For them, this is where the riot ends, in the city hospital. Luckier than those who were destined to end the evening of July 14th in the city morgue. This is Jean Parr, WCBS TV News in Newark.
In the press, we continue to take top honors. From the New York Post, Channel 2 did much the best TV job of covering the tragic Newark race riots and generously shared the film last night with non-commercial Channel 13. Our footage was also being used coast to coast by CBS News. By Sunday, the death toll had reached 23. Approximately 2,000 had been injured, 1,600 had been arrested. And as usual, in such major outbreaks of racial violence, those not directly involved found it hard to comprehend what was actually going on. With that in mind, WCBS TV News canceled the previously scheduled subject for that Sunday's Newsmakers broadcast, and instead again switched live to the Newark Armory for a 25-minute interview with Governor Hughes and Mayor Ardenizio.
How many do you suspect have arrived in Newark in the last few days from out of town?
I don't know. I have been told, but not without documentation, that many of those arrested, some of those arrested at least, are from other parts of the country. But I can't give any further statement on that now.
Mr. Mayor, did you know that there was all this ammunition and weaponry in Newark?
Well, I don't know that it was here, and I don't believe that many other people knew that it was here. Certainly, if we were aware of it, we would have done something about it. However, it's my theory at this point that it may very well be that this ammunition presently is being moved in here in some way. And last night I alerted our police director to certainly look into the possibility of searching vehicles as they enter our city from any particular vantage point.
Governor, you may be aware that about 40 Negroes from New York City have been picked up. Some of them were found with weapons. From whatever information you may have, is this a unrelated group of people, or were they together, or what was the circumstance?
I have no indication of an active conspiracy among them, although certainly the facts wouldn't rule that out. I might point out, Ralph, that thanks to the Congress of the United States and the delay in adopting a gun control law, that nothing could be simpler than persons intending to use them to order in guns, including submachine guns and automatic weapons, simply send off a mail order to some foreign state which doesn't prevent their sale. And whether you're a narcotics addict or a mental patient or a convicted criminal or anything else, there's nothing to impede you buying them.
That same evening, another special report. this one preempting a scheduled eye on New York. The broadcast was live, employing a New York studio and 2 remote units in Newark. 5 reporters who had been covering the riots for 5 days were given a chance to air what they had observed and felt.
The intent of this broadcast is really a pause to assess for you what we know to date of the crisis in Newark, its possible causes, and the directions this troubled city may take when rifle fire has ceased and the dreary cleanup begins, as it inevitably must.
On the scene at one remote unit in Newark was reporter Chet Curtis commenting on the oft-heard cry of police brutality.
Perhaps they did use too much force in a number of cases. As Chris mentioned, I saw at least 24 cases where exceptional force was used in order to subdue someone. But again, you must remember, on a darkened street, you don't know where the missile is going to come from. You don't know where the bullet is going to come from. These men are tense. They're human beings. They're just as frightened as anybody else on that street, although not frightened to the point where they're coming apart, but they are under a great deal of pressure.
In another part of the city, at another live remote, reporter Robert Potts on the controversial presence of the National Guard.
Poor and SNCC and a number of the community representatives of the United Community Corporation, the anti-poverty group here in Newark, backed up this as one of several demands being made upon the mayor and the governor of the state, and they stick to it. And they say that the only way to end the riot is to remove those security forces.
Bob, there's no indication, is there, that the governor is taking that request with any seriousness at this point?
No, I don't very well see how he could be. I think that even many of the Negro leaders that he's talked to would recommend otherwise. It seemed very definitely to be in a minority opinion that removal of those troops would do any good.
In the studio, reporter Chris Morgan on the plague of all race riots, the rumor, and whether it is intentionally started.
Well, there is a technique to rumor mongering. There is a technique to exhortation in which a rumor can be used to build up the spirit, the fighting spirit of various people. Yeah, this is true. There's no doubt here. In this instance, I'd like to go back to the fact that suddenly you have 300 people massed in front of a precinct, willing and able to believe that a police officer has killed an individual who is being brought into the station under minor arrest. And this rumor is so strong that even the next day in court, when I spoke personally to the person arrested, when I saw him, touched him, talked to him, and came downstairs, asked by the people standing in front of the court, how did the trial go? What did they say about the dead man? And I tried to convince them that, no, he was alive. They wouldn't believe it. They wouldn't accept it. To this day, right now, as late as 2 o'clock this afternoon, there are still individuals in the Central Ward who will insist that the cabbie is dead. Mr. Smith is dead. They insist. You can't dissuade them.
And again, investigative reporter Stedman's careful research proved invaluable in laying bare the fundamental causes of the riots.
I could go on. The first thing I saw were the slums, and I know New York City slums a little bit. I did a series for the Herald Tribune on slums, and a long investigation of New York City slums, but Newark slums are worse. They have very little code enforcement, for instance. Only today, Mayor Adenizio told us that he has still 16% of the buildings, the dwelling units in Newark are substandard, down from 32%, he said. But the way it came down from 32% was to just demolish those 16% of slums. By his own admission, 1 people out of 3 in Newark were living in substandard dwelling units, buildings.
And again, our efforts beyond the call did not go unnoticed in the press. From the Daily News, WCBS-TV, which has given outstanding coverage of the tragedy, devoted another special to the gory outbreak during the evening. That Sunday night, the torrid pace was beginning to catch up. Our WCBS-TV news staff on location in Newark added up to about 85 people. The working day ranged anywhere from 16 to 30 hours. Beside the Newark rioting and the regular daily news coverage, we had at different times dispatched film crews to 2 other troubled cities, Englewood, New Jersey, and Hartford, Connecticut. We were preparing for coverage of a midnight railroad strike, which was to make a shambles of the Monday morning commuter rush. And if that were not enough, we got the report late Sunday evening that a policeman in Plainfield, just down the road from Newark, had been stomped to death by a Negro mob. Within an hour, a WCBS-TV News had 1 crew and a reporter on the scene, a 2nd crew and a producer on the way. Our first unit had just arrived at the police station when an old car bearing a white man and woman and shot full of bullet holes limped out of the ghetto and into the yard. The woman had been shot.
Don't kill me, please, don't kill me! It's all right, it's all right. Thank you so much!
Is that the only place that hurt you, sister? That's the only place? All right. All right. No, you just got a scratch. No, it's nothing. Where's the rest of that? Come on, let's go.
Monday morning, the National Guard was sent from Newark. At first light, the scene in the Plainfield Negro community was all too familiar. Broken glass, bullet holes, bricks and bottles, looted stores. Because the area was much smaller than that in Newark, city officials were able to meet with its leaders and arrange a shaky truce. And that truce was severely threatened, however, by a persisting rumor in the black community that a 7-year-old Negro boy had been shot to death. Reporter Chris Borgen, remembering what the murdered cabbie rumor had done in Newark, set out to prove or disprove the murdered boy story in Plainfield. We became the only news media to put down the rumor. Borgen found his answer with an executive at the hospital.
Nothing, absolutely nothing. There has been no report of any 7-year-old child shot or abused. We saw no 7-year-old child having to do with a riot. No doctor in town has reported any 7-year-old child or any child anywhere near that age. This is a rumor that started the night the officer was killed. It's persisted through the next day. It's been a very difficult rumor to kill.
But Muhlenberg Hospital has been receiving just about all of the casualty victims here.
It's possible we've received every one. I don't know of anyone else who has received any, although some could have been treated in doctor's offices. And if it was a gunshot wound, a doctor would naturally have to report it to the Plainfield Police.
Well, Mr. Broom, here at the Muhlenberg Hospital, as far as your knowledge goes, concerning those patients entering this hospital, the subject of gunshot wounds, no child has entered.
No child has entered, and we have heard of no child. Nobody has produced the child. That's it.
It would be difficult to tally accurately the extra effort WCBS TV News put into covering what turned out to be the top national story over a week. As an indication, though, our film crews alone, cameramen, technicians, and reporters, worked a total of 1,633 hours overtime. The reaction of the public made it all worthwhile. In the wake of the tragedy, we received these reviews from editor and publisher. The depth and drama of the WCBS TV coverage impressed New York viewers who registered shock at the graphic depiction of the battle zone just a few miles away. And from the New York Post on Monday, July 17th, the Channel 2 Noontime Newsmakers program abandoned a chat about Mayor Lindsay's summer task force and switched to the tragic social background of Newark. The result was a live interview with Mayor Adonisio and Governor Hughes. Channel 4 at the time was replaying an old talk show, a repeat. Channel 7 was also preoccupied with programming echoes. It happened later in the day that Channel 2 again wisely dropped a scheduled Eye on New York replay and instead went for an Eye on Newark venture, in which its reporters were given an opportunity to express their viewpoints on the violence. It was a remarkably good day for local TV journalism on the part of Channel 2. By the time Channel 4 got around to special attention to the Newark story at 11:15 last night, there was another big story brewing, the rail strike. This is Jim Jenson, WCBS TV News, reporting.